Hey there, friends. So if you have followed me for a little while, you know that we plan to retire in France. It's still a few years away, so don't worry. But because I am a dreamer and also a planner, I am constantly looking at houses online in France. So the homes that we are generally looking at are like 18th, 19th, and early 20th century homes. You know, the ones that have character and history to them. But something I am seeing far more often than I would like is a, beautiful French stone house, maybe 18th or even 17th century. And for the most part, like the inside of the house retains that character with the stone walls and the beautiful wood flooring until you get to the kitchen. Jump scare. And for some reason, they've decided that what was needed in this beautiful old home is this ultra modern, sleek, stark kitchen with lots of stainless steel, bright, shiny cabinets, and the red, so much red. And if it's not the ultra modern look, it's a very dated 60s or 70s style kitchen. So we have come to the realization that we are probably just going to have to gut whatever kitchen we end up with. And because we don't want to spend tens of thousands of euros renovating a kitchen, we have decided that we want to go with an unfitted kitchen. If you're not familiar with what an unfitted kitchen is, it essentially means a kitchen that isn't built out of like permanent cabinets that are attached to every wall. Instead, the room is made up of individual pieces of furniture like hutches, cupboards, work tables, even dressers, and maybe open shelving, and of course things like a Hoosier cabinet, which has been a staple in American kitchens since the early 1900s. So each piece of furniture had its own job, and that's pretty much how kitchens worked for most of history. Before the early 20th century, built-in cabinetry as we know it just really wasn't the norm. Kitchens were rooms filled with useful furniture. Storage lived in cupboards and buffets. Work happened on large tables. Tools were visible and within reach. The Hoosier cabinet became immensely popular in the US between the 1900s and the 1930s. It combined storage, workspace, drawers, shelves, even flour sifters into one incredibly practical piece of furniture. It was basically a compact baking station long before modern built-ins existed. Fitted kitchens with the kind of cabinets permanently attached to the walls didn't really become common until around the 1950s, after World War II. What I love most is just the character that an unfitted kitchen brings. To me, it tends to feel more lived in, more personal. You see the tools of cooking. Pots might be hanging near the stove, cutting boards lean against the wall, or, aprons hanging within reach of the sink. Maybe herbs are drying on a rack somewhere. Instead of everything disappearing behind cabinet doors, the kitchen shows signs of life. It quietly says, real cooking and real life happens here. But there's also a practical side to it because the pieces of furniture, you can move them, you can rearrange them, replace them one at a time. You're not committing to an entire wall of cabinetry that, has to be torn out if your needs change. It also opens the door to building a kitchen gradually. You can thrift pieces, refinish older furniture, or mix antique and modern elements, and just kind of let the room evolve over time. But even though I'm definitely a maximalist, I still need balance between function and beauty, especially in the kitchen. If something is going to be out in the open, it needs to be useful, but it can also be beautiful. Copper pots hanging on a rail, a wooden cutting board that's been used for years, a sturdy dresser full of cookware. These things aren't decorative clutter, but they also aren't hidden away. They're part of the room. Minimalist and modern kitchens tend to hide everything. Unfitted kitchens do almost the opposite. They curate what's visible, so the tools themselves become part of the environment. And if you cook a lot, that actually makes a lot of sense, because the kitchen is one of the rooms in the house that is constantly in use. It's hard to keep it looking perfect all day. But when the objects around you are both functional and beautiful, the room just feels good even when it's busy. The other thing I think about a lot, especially because we have moved so many times, is just how much stuff ends up in a kitchen that we don't actually use. Every move, we've had a different layout, different cabinets, different storage challenges, and somehow we always end up with drawers just full of gadgets and tools that just kind of get pushed to the back and forgotten about. Now, obviously, I've never been accused of being a minimalist, but I am trying to think much more practically in the kitchen and just making sure that I've got tools that are necessary and useful for the way that I cook. And what I like about the idea of an unfitted kitchen is that the storage is often a lot more intentional. It might be smaller, it might be divided differently, but it kind of encourages you to keep the things that you actually use, the tools that you reach for all the time, and let go of the rest. So instead of having more storage, it just ends up being more efficient storage. And I think that really appeals to me, especially since we cook and bake so much. I don't want a kitchen full of things that, I might use someday. I want a kitchen that works well every day. So a quick side note, when we first moved to Germany, we were told that it was a distinct possibility that we would have to buy an entire kitchen in whichever house that we were going to rent. Luckily, that did not end up being the case for us, but it seems to be a pretty common theme in Germany, somewhat here in Vienna, and I think Italy as well, where when you move, you take your entire kitchen with you. Not just the appliances, but the counters, the sink, the cabinets, everything. And frankly, to an American, that is just a mind-boggling custom. But I wonder if this might be a bit of a holdover from when kitchens were unfitted. I mean, it was furniture after all, so of course you would take your kitchen furniture with you when you move. So if anyone out there knows if this is where this custom comes from, or if I'm just completely off base, please let me know in the comments, but be nice. And I think the idea of an unfitted kitchen makes a lot more sense when you actually see it in practice. Although I do have a modern fitted kitchen in this apartment, I do have one piece in my kitchen that kind of works this way. This is my Hoosier cabinet, and I use this all the time. It's not just sitting here looking pretty, even though she is very pretty. I keep things like mixing bowls, my collection of jars, baking ingredients, just all the things that I reach for regularly right here in one place. My Hoosier is from the 1930s. I actually found it on Facebook Marketplace when we were living in DC. Now, it doesn't have all of the original features anymore that some of them did. A lot of the Hoosiers had built-in flour bins, sugar bins, even sifters. And of course, back in the day, that would have been very functional and useful. But even without all of that, you can see how much it does. This one piece of furniture replaces what normally would be multiple cabinets, drawers, and sections of countertops in a modern kitchen. This enamel worktop is really easy to clean and sanitize, and it can actually be adjusted by moving it in and out. Hoosier cabinets and other brands became really popular in the early 1900s into the 1930s. They were mass-produced in the US and marketed as these step-saving, efficiency-boosting kitchen tools, which is kind of funny because we tend to think of old kitchens as being a little bit less efficient. But in a lot of ways, they were incredibly well thought out. But because it's not attached to the wall, if we move, which we will, it comes with us. It came from the US and is now living here in Vienna in an apartment from 1897, and one day will make its way to a home in France. And this is really what kitchens just used to be built around, not walls of cabinetry, but pieces like this, furniture that had a purpose, that, worked really hard and could move and evolve with you. And of course, a Hoosier is just one example. Once you start looking into unfitted kitchens, you realize there are so many different ways that this can work. So of course, I have been saving lots and lots of inspiration photos and also paying way more attention when we go to flea markets or antique shops. And I've started, noticing certain pieces that could work really well in a kitchen like this. What's interesting is that it's not just kitchen furniture. It's really just furniture used in a kitchen. I'm not just thinking that's a really beautiful piece of furniture. I'm thinking, could that work in a kitchen? Could that hold dishes? Could that be a prep surface? Could that replace an entire section of cabinetry? And that's really where this starts to become really fun. Because instead of designing a kitchen all at once, you're kind of building it piece by piece. And I do think it's important to say, it does take time to find the right pieces, figure out how they function, and make everything work together. It's not a quick process. But it also means that you're not locked into one decision. The kitchen can evolve as you go. I actually enjoy the process of finding pieces, thinking about, how they might work together, and just letting the space come together gradually instead of all at once. And when I think about what I'd actually want in a kitchen like this, it's not just about how it looks, it's about how I would really use it. I cook pretty simple meals during the week, but I also bake a lot, especially breads. And on the weekends, my husband and I do a lot of cooking together. So I don't want a kitchen where I'm walking all over the place. I like the idea of having work zones, spaces where just, things make sense. Maybe one area for prep, another for baking, something like the Hoosier where kind of everything is within reach. And then a central work table that really becomes the heart of the kitchen. I'm definitely drawn to having a large freestanding work table in the center, not an island with stools. I don't like stools, but a real working surface. Somewhere to knead dough, chop vegetables, set things down as I move through the space. And because it's not fixed, it can shift over time. I think I'd still lean towards mostly closed storage. I don't necessarily want everything out on display all the time, especially pantry items. But I love the idea of cupboards with glass fronts, maybe with a little curtain, something that just kind of softens it a bit. So things are still accessible, but they feel contained. And of course, dressers or anything with drawers. All of the bottom cabinets in my kitchen now are drawers. And honestly, I don't know how I lived without drawers in the kitchen until now. It makes things so much easier. Visually, I am really drawn to a mix of dark, rich woods paired with painted pieces, soft greens, butter yellow, maybe some blue for furniture pieces. Nothing too matchy, just pieces that feel like they've come together over time. And I would love to have at least one marble surface somewhere, even if it's just a small section for baking. And then there's the stove. I love the look of an aga. I just think that they are beautiful. And I have actually seen several houses that have them already. I like the idea of something substantial, something that feels like, it belongs in the room. And most of the kitchens that we've seen, they have a hearth or, fireplace area, which is an absolute perfect spot for an aga. I would love to have something like a chamber stove. They are just so incredibly practical, but I don't know how realistic that is to find in France. Maybe there is a French equivalent to a chamber stove. So I'm sure it's going to end up being a mix, something that, gives that feeling, but still works for how we actually cook. And I'm not opposed to having something a little bit more modern alongside it, if that's what makes sense. But more than anything, I want this space to feel a certain way. comfortable, grounded, and cozy. I keep picturing, coming in from the garden with a basket full of fruits and vegetables that we've grown in our potager, grabbing a pitcher of iced tea from the fridge, little breeze coming through with the smell of jasmine outside, and just getting inspired to cook something from our bounty. That's the kind of kitchen that I want. So looking at some of these houses, I do think that the layout might be a little tricky with some of these older homes. So we've started just looking at the spaces a little differently, less about what's already there and more about, what could work. The more I look at these older kitchens and pieces like the Hoosier and all of these unfitted spaces, the more I realize that, they weren't lacking anything. They were just designed differently. They were built around how people actually lived, how they cooked, how they moved through the space, and what they used every day. And I think somewhere along the way, we started designing kitchens to look a certain way instead of designing them to work for the people actually using them. So now when we're looking at homes in France, we don't really look at the kitchen itself anymore. We look at the bones of the room, the light, the layout, the space. And I just, find myself thinking, what could this become? Because maybe what 100-year-old kitchens got right wasn't just the furniture. It was the idea that a kitchen could grow with you instead of, being something that you install and eventually replace. So I'm really curious, if you were designing your own kitchen, would you go with something just fully fitted and more modern? Or would you ever consider something a little bit more unfitted, built, piece by piece over time? Or maybe a mixture of the two. And if you have a piece of kitchen furniture that like this already, something old, something functional, I would love to hear about it. This is definitely something that I'm going to keep thinking about for a while, especially as we, plan for our future. But I would love to know what you think about this. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.